The sound of silver against porcelain filled the long table. Knives and forks scraped politely, wine glasses clinked, and the low hum of corporate chatter made the executive dinner feel almost rehearsed. Candles flickered between bottles of Bordeaux and tiny pyramids of folded napkins. Every chair was occupied, every seat, but one was filled with people certain they belonged, until she walked in. A woman in a vivid burnt orange dress, sleeves rolled just above the elbow, posture still but unyielding. She wasn't draped in diamonds or wrapped in a tailored suit. She didn't carry a branded clutch or arrive with an entourage. She came alone, quietly, the kind of presence that unsettled without explanation. At first, the laughter dimmed only slightly as she pulled out her chair. A few faces tilted, puzzled. Then, like a spark striking dry tinder, one voice erupted, slicing through the room louder than the clinking glass and the whispered deals. "Go eat in the kitchen, Black." The words detonated across the table. Not whispered, not veiled in politeness. Thrown like a spear, sharpened with cruelty, and meant to pierce in front of every set of watching eyes. For a split second, silence. Even the candles seemed to falter. Then came the ripple, smirks forming on the lips of suited men, muffled laughter from two women in red dresses, the sound of someone clearing their throat as if that could wash away the violence of what had just been said. The woman in orange didn't flinch. She stood, chair still tucked neatly behind her, arms folding slowly across her chest. Calm, unmoving. Her eyes locked not on the insult but on the one who delivered it, a blonde executive at the far side of the table, fingers still extended as if authority lived in her hand. The insult had landed, but its target refused to bend. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The blonde doubled down, her voice louder, feeding off the uneasy chuckles that had begun to spread. This dinner is for leaders, not imposters. People like you should be serving, not sitting here. Knives paused midair. A glass was set down too hard, its stem rattling against the plate. The room wasn't quiet anymore, it was charged. The woman in orange remained motionless. She didn't rise to meet the venom. She let it hang, let the ugliness echo across the mahogany and marble. Then she tilted her head slightly, the smallest movement, but enough to reclaim gravity in the room. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a fuse. The audience of executives didn't know it yet, but in less than 5 minutes, the same voice that tried to erase her would beg for the contract she controlled, and the table they thought was theirs would crumble beneath the weight of her truth. The room adjusted slowly, like a theater audience unsure whether the curtain had risen or if they were watching a mistake unfold. At the head of the table, servers in black vests poured wine without comment, their eyes darting toward the disturbance but never lingering. The music piped faintly through ceiling speakers, soft jazz that suddenly felt brittle, mismatched with the heat crawling across the table. She remained standing, the woman in orange her name, Danielle Hayes, 42 years old. To everyone here, she was a quiet stranger. To the world outside, she was the architect behind Hayes Global Foods, a conglomerate that fed millions through supply contracts stretching from Chicago to Seoul. Tonight, she chose not to arrive in a limousine, not to wear her boardroom armor. No staff, no assistant at her side. Just herself and a seat at the table she had already paid for 100 times over. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had accepted this dinner invitation as a courtesy, a chance to listen to partners' pitch expansions, to observe how these executives spoke when they believed the room was theirs. What she walked into was no surprise. It was a test she had seen replayed for decades. At 23, she had been told to use the staff entrance when arriving at her first client gala. At 29, she was mistaken for a caterer at a negotiation she personally funded. At 36, her chair was removed from a panel minutes before she was to speak until she walked on stage anyway. Each memory was a scar, not of weakness, but of recognition. Power dressed in black skin was never granted its seat willingly. It had to be claimed, and here it was again. Around her, the table tried to recover. A man in a navy suit leaned toward his colleague and whispered too loudly, "She can't be serious." Another clutched his glass, swirling it in slow circles as if the wine could explain what the silence could not. The blonde executive who had barked the insult kept her hand poised above the table, knuckles tight, as though daring Danielle to respond. But Danielle didn't bite. Her calm unsettled them more than any raised voice could have. She pulled her chair back slowly, the sound of wood scraping against marble echoing sharper than any retort. She didn't sit yet. Instead, she placed a small leather folder, ordinary, nondescript on the linen tablecloth in front of her. No logo, no flourish, just presence. A young server near the wall shifted, uncertain. His phone buzzed in his apron pocket. For a moment, his gaze caught Danielle's. She gave no signal, but something in her stillness said, "Pay attention." The dinner continued, but not really. Conversations stumbled forward, forced laughter returned in short bursts, and silverware struck plates in rhythms too quick, too defensive. The insult still hung in the air, unabsorbed, unforgotten. Danielle remained quiet, every breath deliberate. She knew the weight of her silence. She knew the timing mattered. The executives thought the room belonged to them. They were wrong. In less than 5 minutes, their laughter would curdle into fear. The laughter didn't die, it sharpened. From halfway down the table, a man in a slate-gray tie leaned back, stretching his arms as though the whole spectacle amused him. "She wandered into the wrong ballroom," he muttered, loud enough for 3 rows of chairs to hear. His words carried the smugness of someone confident the room would nod along, and some did. A woman in pearls tilted her head, smirking. Or maybe she's here to audition as entertainment. A ripple of chuckles followed, soft but cutting, the kind of laughter meant not just to dismiss but to erase. Danielle lowered herself into her chair at last, unhurried. Her movements were precise, napkin lifted, unfolded, placed across her lap. She didn't rise to meet their cruelty. She let them circle themselves, every taunt tying the rope tighter. The blonde executive, still riding the thrill of her first strike, leaned forward. "This dinner is for decision-makers. You don't even look like you belong at this level." Her tone was sharp, performative, rehearsed as if she'd waited her whole life for this stage. The young server at the wall fidgeted. His eyes darted from Danielle to the blonde, then to the faces around the table. He wasn't filming yet, but the thought of it lingered at his fingertips. At the opposite end, another executive, a man with a clipped accent and cufflinks engraved with his initials, tapped his glass with a spoon. "Let's not waste time," he announced. "There are real contracts to discuss. Perhaps she'd be more comfortable at a side table." The implication hung heavy. She wasn't one of them. Silver scraped against porcelain again as others resumed eating, trying to normalize the humiliation now baked into the air. But the rhythm was off, jittery, unnatural. The room knew something was unraveling. Danielle did not look left or right. She sipped her water, eyes steady, silence louder than their derision. It was then that another chuckle rose, this time from a man seated 2 chairs away. "Honestly, she should be grateful we even let her sit." His tone carried no irony. He believed it. The young server's jaw tightened. His hand slipped into his pocket, brushing the phone again. The air around him vibrated with the weight of complicity. He had seen prejudice before, but never in this room, never so naked. Danielle set her glass down with deliberate care. The crystal touched the tablecloth without a sound, yet it felt like a gavel. No one noticed the small light flicker across the leather folder in front of her, the faint reflection of a phone screen sliding on. She didn't move to open it. Not yet. The blonde leaned back, victorious. "That's what I thought," she said. "Nothing to add, because there's nothing you are." The table chuckled again. Louder now. Crueler now. Danielle simply folded her hands. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was the stillness before the storm. The table rattled with laughter, but Danielle stayed still, not frozen anchored. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the linen, her posture upright, chin slightly lifted. She didn't glare, didn't shrink, didn't even blink at the chorus of mockery. Her calm became the loudest sound in the room. One man smirked, expecting a protest. Another leaned forward, waiting for her voice to crack, for some plea or stammer to prove his assumptions correct, but nothing came. Danielle's silence pulled the room into an uneasy gravity. It unsettled them. The blonde executive shifted in her chair, smile faltering just enough to betray a flicker of doubt. She had hurled her insult like a torch, expecting flames. Instead, it had fizzled against stone. Danielle adjusted the napkin on her lap. A small, ordinary gesture, but deliberate, controlled. At 23, she remembered gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles ached when a hotel clerk called security on her. She had shouted then, desperate to be heard, desperate to belong. Tonight, She needed no such desperation. She had outgrown it. Silence now was not surrender. Silence was strategy. The young server at the wall hesitated, phone in hand. He hovered at the edge of recording, but Danielle caught his eyes just for a second. A subtle shake of her head. Not yet. His breath hitched. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, cheeks warm with conflicted shame. Across the table, knives scratched plates too hard, glasses clinked in rhythm too fast. The executives tried to drown the stillness, but it only magnified it. The room wasn't recovering, it was fraying. Danielle finally moved. She reached for her water again, lifted it, and let the candlelight catch the rim. She held it midair longer than needed, as if to remind the table that patience itself was power. Then she sipped, eyes steady on no one, and everyone at once. The blonde cleared her throat, defensive now. See? Nothing to say. Her laugh was forced. Exactly what I expected. But Danielle did have something to say. She placed the glass down carefully and let her voice slip into the silence measured, calm. A single line aimed like a blade. Be careful what you expect. No rise in tone, no sharpness, just steel wrapped in silk. The words landed heavier than the insults that preceded them. The room shifted, unease creeping beneath tailored jackets and diamond bracelets. For a moment, no one laughed. Danielle folded her hands again, posture unbroken. She had given them enough rope. She was watching them tie it tighter, knot by knot. The blonde leaned back, forcing a smirk to return, but her fingers tapped against the table, restless. The confidence was cracking. And Danielle, still silent, still composed, let the crack spread. From the far end of the hall, a glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on marble. The sound jolted the room like a gunshot, breaking the illusion that this was just another dinner. Heads turned, eyes flicked, but what really drew attention wasn't the glass. It was the boy in the black vest. He'd been standing at the wall since the first toast, tray balanced with practiced precision, posture rehearsed to be invisible. But now, invisibility wasn't possible. His eyes had locked on Danielle from the start. He'd seen the insult hurled like a stone, seen the laughter ripple like a wave, and seen her stillness anchor the chaos. And now he couldn't stand still. His hand drifted into his pocket again, pulling the phone halfway out. The faint glow illuminated his knuckles. A small act, but in a room this tense, it was a spotlight. One of the suited men caught it. "Put that away," he barked, waving dismissively. "Staff don't film." But the boy didn't move. His throat tightened. He looked at Danielle, at the calm woman sitting like the storm hadn't touched her. Their eyes met again. For the second time, she gave the subtlest of gestures a tilt of the chin, a near-invisible nod. Not yet. He froze, breath shallow. He wasn't sure if she was protecting him from punishment, or if she was waiting for something larger. Either way, he obeyed. The phone slid back into his pocket, but his gaze never left her. Across the table, two guests whispered. One, a younger woman in a silver gown, leaned toward her companion. "That was out of line. Did you hear what she said to her?" Her friend hushed her quickly, eyes darting toward the executives, but the seed had been planted. A stir moved through the back rows, soft murmurs, the kind that grow when injustice refuses to stay hidden. The insult had not just hit Danielle, it had hit the room, and not everyone was willing to swallow it. At the wall, the young server clenched his jaw. He might not film, but he would remember every word. Danielle shifted slightly in her seat, folding the leather folder closed with one hand. The action drew subtle attention. It was ordinary, yet final, like closing a book whose ending she already knew. She scanned the table once, eyes steady, gaze brushing over each face as if cataloging every witness, every reaction, every silence. The blonde executive, emboldened again by her colleague's snickers, leaned back in her chair. "Don't waste your breath, sweetheart. No one here cares." But she was wrong. The boy at the wall cared. The woman in the silver gown cared. And the silence that followed said more than the laughter ever could. Danielle didn't answer. She didn't need to. The room itself had begun to fracture. And soon fracture would become collapse. The air turned brittle. The executives had laughed, then hesitated, then laughed again, each wave thinner than the last. But hesitation doesn't breed humility. It breeds desperation. A man in a double-breasted jacket slammed his fork onto the plate. "Enough of this circus," he said, voice sharp, carrying across the entire table. "This is an executive dinner. If we let just anyone sit here, what does that say about us? A low murmur of agreement rippled through the middle seats. Another man, balding, with a gold watch glinting under the chandelier, leaned in. She's not on the list. I checked. So why is she here? Danielle's chair creaked slightly as she adjusted her posture. Calm. Still centered. The blonde executive seized her chance. Exactly, she said, lips curling. She waltzes in, dressed like she came from a department store clearance rack, and expects us to believe she belongs? Please. The words were cruel, but the real venom lay in how casually they were delivered, as if humiliation were policy, not prejudice. The young server at the wall flinched. His hand twitched toward his pocket again. This time, Danielle didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The command was clear: hold. At the far end, a man with a clipped European accent raised his glass. She hasn't spoken because she can't. There's nothing to defend. She's an imposter, and imposters are dangerous. He drank slowly, savoring the false weight of his own words. Dangerous. The label hung heavy. Danielle's eyes narrowed just slightly, the first visible crack in her stillness. Not anger, calculation. Another woman chimed in, her diamond earrings catching the candlelight. If she doesn't leave, I'll call security myself. These events are exclusive for a reason. Standards matter. The blonde executive smirked, emboldened by the chorus. You heard her. Call them. Let's put an end to this charade. The server's phone buzzed in his apron. He looked down, then back up at Danielle, uncertain whether fate itself was nudging him forward. Across the table, the woman in the silver gown whispered again, louder this time. This isn't right. She hasn't done anything. Her companion hushed her, but too late. Others had heard. A few heads turned. The fracture widened. Danielle picked up her fork, cut a small piece of the untouched entree, and placed it calmly in her mouth. The motion was deliberate, surgical. The message was simple. I am not moving, the blonde scoffed. Look at her eating like she owns the place. And in that instant, for the first time, Danielle's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper, because she did. The table didn't know it yet, but the contract that fed half their corporations lived in her hands alone. The tension snapped. The blonde executive, riding the wave of cruel laughter, grabbed her wine glass with deliberate slowness. The stem glittered under candlelight as she lifted it high, eyes locked on Danielle with a smirk that dared her to react. Then she tilted her wrist. A crimson arc spilled across the white tablecloth, staining it like blood. Drops splashed against Danielle's place setting, a few landing on her sleeve. The room gasped. Someone coughed to cover their shock. Another muttered, "Oh my God." But no one stopped her. The blonde leaned back, satisfied. This seat is not for you, she said, her voice pitched sharp, slicing through the stunned silence. Leave now before I make sure you're escorted out. The words echoed, amplified by the ringing quiet that followed. Danielle looked down at the spreading stain on the linen, at the droplets crawling toward her untouched plate. She brushed her sleeve with 2 fingers, calm, precise, as if wiping away dust instead of humiliation. Her stillness cut deeper than any outburst could have. The young server at the wall clenched his fists. His phone was out before he realized it, camera hovering, red light blinking faintly. This time, Danielle's eyes flicked to him only briefly, but her gaze was enough. He froze, uncertain whether her silence meant stop or wait. Across the table, the man with the gold watch chuckled darkly. She should be grateful that's all at Island Security would have dragged her out already. The woman in pearls leaned closer, her smile thin and venomous. She's lucky we don't charge her for the tablecloth. Murmurs rolled through the room, half nervous, half amused. But under it all was a new sound, the shuffle of unease, the recognition that something had gone too far. Danielle finally moved. She reached for her leather folder, fingers resting on it like a pianist finding the first note. Her gaze swept the room once slow, deliberate, unblinking. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was beginning to feel like a verdict. The blonde executive, unnerved by the silence she herself had created, leaned forward again, trying to reclaim control. "What are you waiting for?" she barked. "Leave." But Danielle didn't. She placed the folder flat on the table, hands folding over it as though she were about to preside over a courtroom. The server's phone trembled in his grip. He wasn't filming anymore, he was documenting. Every instinct told him this moment mattered. At the far end, the woman in the silver gown whispered to her neighbor, louder than she meant to, "This is wrong." And for the first time all night, other heads nodded. The tide had begun to turn, though no one admitted it yet. Danielle sat back, eyes steady, every movement measured. The wine stain spread across the linen, a scar on the table itself. The insult had escalated to assault, and with it, the room had crossed a line it could never uncross. Danielle's fingers tapped once on the leather folder. Not a nervous tick, a signal. She slid a hand into her clutch, drew out a slim phone, and placed it on the table beside the stained linen. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, as though she had rehearsed this moment 100 times. The executives leaned in, sensing a shift but not understanding it. Danielle pressed a single button. The screen lit, her voice steady, calm, carrying enough steel to silence the mutters. "Rachel," she said evenly. A crisp voice answered instantly through the tiny speaker. "Yes, ma'am. Protocol's ready." Gasps fluttered around the table. Not everyone caught the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Business, precise, authoritative. The blonde executive scoffed, masking her unease with laughter. "Oh, please, calling for backup now? What are you going to do, phone a friend?" Danielle didn't even look at her. "Log this moment," she instructed. "Timestamp it. Note the words, the actions, the escalation." Rachel's voice came back firm. "Logged. Live record initiated." The young server at the wall exhaled, chest tight. He had no idea what protocol meant, but he knew the energy in the room had shifted. The man with the gold watch leaned back, smug. "Is this supposed to scare us? You're wasting everyone's time. Put the phone away." Danielle lifted her eyes to him, her expression unreadable. "Time," she said softly, "is exactly what you just ran out of." Her words landed like a gavel. A ripple of unease moved through the guests. The woman in the silver gown sat straighter, eyes darting between Danielle and the executives around her. She whispered to her companion, "She's not bluffing." The blonde executive's voice rose, shrill now. "This is nonsense. Security should have been called already. She doesn't belong here." Danielle's gaze sharpened. "Belonging is not yours to grant or revoke." She turned slightly toward the phone. "Rachel, escalate to phase 2. "Confirmed," Rachel replied without hesitation. "Contract board notified. Supply division alerted. Legal standing by." A stunned hush fell across the table. The words cut through the candlelit air, heavy with implication. The man with the cufflinks laughed nervously. "Legal? Supply division? What game are you playing?" Danielle leaned forward, hands folded. "No game, just accountability." For the first time, the blonde executive's smirk faltered. Her knuckles whitened around the stem of her glass. She had intended to humiliate, to dominate. Instead, the spotlight had turned and she stood exposed in it. The young server's phone buzzed again in his pocket. He didn't need to pull it out. He knew something irreversible had just begun. Danielle's silence had been the fuse. This call was the spark, and the fire was already spreading. The table, moments ago so sure of itself, now sat in suspended silence. Forks lay abandoned. Glasses, half raised, trembled slightly in unsteady hands. The only steady presence was Danielle, her phone still lit on the table, her eyes unblinking. The blonde executive tried to claw the room back under her control. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her laughter brittle, cracking under pressure. "Who do you think you're fooling? You're a guest who crashed a dinner, nothing more." Danielle didn't rush. She let the accusation rot in the air before she spoke. "You've spent the last 20 minutes telling me I don't belong." Her voice was calm, but every syllable landed with surgical precision. "So let me be clear. She reached forward, opened the leather folder, and slid a single page into the candlelight. Contracts. The embossed seal at the top glimmered gold. Across the header, in bold, Hayes Global Foods, Incorporated. The silver-gowned guest gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Danielle's tone sharpened, no louder, just harder. "You called me an imposter in the very room that eats because of me. The bread on this table, the wine you toasted with, the beef on your plates, all of it moves through my contracts. Every forkful here begins with my signature." A stunned beat, then murmurs, whispers, "Hayes Global? That can't be." "She's the supplier?" The man with the cufflinks scoffed, but his voice cracked. "Impossible. Hayes Global is—" He froze as his eyes dropped to the document again. The seal, the signature, the undeniable authority printed in black and gold. Danielle didn't blink. Hayes Global Foods. Annual revenue, $1 billion. Largest supplier for your corporations, your franchises, your events, including this dinner, which you tried to erase me from. The blonde's face drained of color. You're lying. This is some stunt. Danielle's lips curved, not a smile, but something sharper. Rachel, yes, ma'am, came the voice through the speaker. Confirm identity. Confirmed. This is Danielle Hayes, founder and CEO of Hayes Global Foods, primary signatory of the $5 billion contract currently feeding every one of their companies. Verification complete. The weight of those words flattened the room. The young server exhaled sharply, eyes wide. He hadn't just been watching Injustice, he'd been watching history twist in real time. The woman in the silver gown spoke louder now, her voice trembling but clear. I knew it! I told you she wasn't bluffing. The man with the gold watch set his glass down too hard. The stem cracked, splintering against porcelain. This changes nothing, he muttered, though his tone betrayed the truth. It changed everything. Danielle folded the document neatly back into its folder. Her gaze swept the table one last time, and then she said, voice low but absolute, the problem was never that you didn't know who I was. The problem is how you treated someone you thought was nobody. The words detonated harder than any insult they had thrown. And this time, no one laughed. The room collapsed in on itself. Whispers collided, overlapping like static. The blonde executive's confidence drained so fast it looked physical, her shoulders slumped, her jaw unhinged, her fingers tapping uselessly against the stained tablecloth. The man with the cufflinks leaned back, sweat beading along his hairline despite the cool air. She can't be serious, he muttered, but his voice carried no weight now. It sounded like denial, not certainty. The man with the gold watch clutched his glass too tightly. A crack ran down the stem, splitting it in his hand. He flinched, cursing under his breath, the sound more confession than anger. The woman in pearls dropped her napkin onto the table, the fabric landing limp and heavy. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of someone realizing the ground beneath her was dissolving. The young server in the black vest nearly stepped forward, caught himself, then stood frozen, his heart hammering. He had witnessed humiliation, then stillness, then revelation. Now he was watching power shift like a tide sweeping the shore. At the far end, the woman in the silver gown raised her voice, trembling but determined. You all heard it. She owns the contract. Every bite here came from her company. Her words cracked the silence wider. Guests began looking at each other, searching for reassurance that wasn't there. A man near the middle adjusted his tie 3 times in 30 seconds, unable to meet Danielle's gaze. The blonde executive finally stammered, This isn't fair. We didn't know who you were. Danielle's eyes cut toward her. Calm, precise. And that is the point. The sentence landed like a verdict. The boy at the wall felt his phone buzz again. He resisted the urge to check it. He didn't need to. Every second in this room was already etched into memory. The executives shifted in their seats, trapped between indignation and fear. Their world was unraveling, not because of an outsider, but because of their own arrogance laid bare. A chair scraped sharply against the marble as one man stood, muttering excuses. I have calls to make. But no one followed him. No one dared. Danielle leaned back in her chair, perfectly composed, perfectly centered. Around her, the mighty had shrunk. The powerful had withered. The laughter that once filled the room was gone. In its place was the quiet panic of people realizing they had played the wrong hand in front of the only person who mattered. The woman in pearls whispered, God, what have we done? The man with the cufflinks whispered back, everything wrong. And still, Danielle said nothing. She didn't have to. The chaos unraveling around her was already her answer. Danielle placed her phone squarely in the center of the table. The glow from its screen reflected against the glasses, cutting a cold line across the stained linen. Her voice, when it came, was steady and unhurried. Rachel, she said. Yes, ma'am. Terminate the supply contract with every company represented at this table. Effective immediately. The words detonated louder than the shattering glass had earlier. Gasps. A fork clattered to the floor. Someone swore under his breath. The woman in pearls jerked upright, eyes wide. No, you can't. But Danielle's gaze silenced her. Confirm termination, Danielle continued. Rachel's voice over the speaker was crisp, businesslike, merciless. Confirmed. System lock engaged. contracts suspended, notifications dispatched to legal and finance. The blonde executive's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She sounded less like a leader now, and more like a child begging not to be punished. Wait, you don't understand. This dinner it was a misunderstanding. Danielle cut her off with a glance sharper than any blade. Humiliation isn't a misunderstanding, it's a choice, and you made it. The man with the cufflinks lurched forward, his confidence gone, his voice cracking. You'll ruin entire divisions if you do this. Thousands of jobs. Danielle leaned in, folding her hands. You worried about jobs only after your own power was threatened, not when you were laughing, not when you spilled wine like it was nothing. Don't speak to me of consequences you never cared about until they were yours. Silence swallowed him whole. The young server at the wall exhaled, trembling. He had seen firings before quiet, behind closed doors. He had never seen power executed like this, in real time, in front of witnesses who could do nothing to stop it. The man with the gold watch pushed back from the table, his voice rising. We can renegotiate. We can. Danielle's voice cut him clean. You cannot renegotiate dignity, and you will not buy it back with money. Rachel's voice returned through the speaker. Confirmation received from legal. All contracts valued at $2.5 billion have been terminated. Access to supply systems revoked. The sound landed like a door slamming shut. Executives shifted in their chairs, pale, sweating, undone. The table that had mocked her minutes earlier now looked like a tribunal facing its own sentence. Danielle closed the folder with finality. Actions have consequences. Tonight you learned that lesson in the most expensive way possible. Her words hung in the air like a verdict carved in stone, and no one dared to argue. The room no longer breathed the same way. Minutes earlier, the dinner had been a theater of arrogance, forks clinking, laughter sharp, insults passed like appetizers. Now, silence ruled. Heavy, undeniable, absolute. The candlelight flickered over pale faces, over the wine stain that had become a scar across the table, over executives who had shrunk into shadows of themselves. Only Danielle remained steady. She gathered her phone, slid it back into her clutch, and rose from her chair. The sound of wood against marble echoed louder than any applause could have. She didn't rush. Power never does. Her gaze swept the table, one face at a time. No anger, no gloating, just certainty. The certainty of someone who had endured humiliation before and turned it into empire. Finally, her voice broke the silence. Calm, low, irrefutable. You thought I didn't belong. The words carried weight, not volume. Every ear bent toward them. You decided my presence was an intrusion, that my skin, my dress, my silence disqualified me from this table. But here's the truth you refuse to see. The table exists because of me. The food on your plates, the contracts that built your companies, the very dinner you used to insult me, all of it passes through my hands. No one moved. A few lowered their eyes. The blonde executive sat frozen, the last trace of defiance drained from her. Danielle leaned forward slightly, her final words cutting like glass. I don't need to shout. I don't need to prove myself. My existence is proof. You tried to erase me. Instead, you erased your own future. Watch how quickly you vanish from the table you thought was yours. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, irreversible. The young server at the wall stood taller, chest full, as if witnessing justice had granted him strength. The woman in the silver gown pressed a hand over her heart, whispering, "Finally." Danielle turned, her heels clicking against marble. Each step was deliberate, measured, final. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. By the time the doors closed behind her, the room she left behind was no longer a dinner. It was a reckoning. And for everyone watching, whether in that hall or later on a screen, the message was unmistakable. True power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't wait for permission. It arrives. It endures. And when disrespected, it rewrites the room.